fog did not drift in, it sank thick, unbreathing, a weight more than a weather. It clung to the thatched rooftops. A valve whined like wool soaked in grief. Even the crows refused the sky that morning. They sat in rows along the chapel's ridge. Watching, always watching. Some said the sickness had a smell, like burnt feathers. Others said it came in silence, in the stillness of water that should ripple but does not. In the echo of footsteps that aren't yours. The hearth fires had died in the night. No one dared relight them. A woman stood barefoot. In the mud, her husband's cloak wrapped around her trembling shoulders. She held her son tight against her ribs, his skin slick with sweat, his eyes wide with something older than pain. The bell rang 3 times before sunrise, not for mass, not for marriage, but for warning. 3 tolls, low and slow, to say the veil had dropped again. They spoke of it like weather, but it was no storm. It had no shape. It took many. Sometimes it came as a dry cough behind. Closed shutters, sometimes as laughter too loud at midnight. Sometimes it wore the face of someone you trusted until you kissed their cheek and tasted ash inside. The healer's hut. Old Mother Isolde stirred a basin of boiled nettle and iron scrap. She whispered to the herbs, words with no Latin, no scripture, only rhythm and memory. She wore a sprig of yew behind her ear, not for protection, but as a warning. The sick child on her table had eyes that rolled back into a white sky. He screamed only when touched by holy water, not wept, screamed, and so they poured more until his skin blistered like wax. The priest kept the chapel doors locked now, not from heretics but from questions. He no longer prayed aloud. He only scratched symbols into the underside of his altar, circles within circles. Eyes without pupils, words not meant for tongues. They said the old gods had returned, or maybe they'd never left. A sack of barley rotted in the baker's arms. No one would eat it. It had grown soft with something that moved like breath beneath. Grain, the well had turned bitter again. Water that stung the throat, water that left the mouth dry. A girl fetched from it at dawn, and by dusk her fingernails had turned black. By morning, her veins could be traced like rivers beneath ice. They buried her beneath a twisted rowan tree, kind that grew where lightning had once struck. At night, the village did not sleep it. Waited, with breath held and shutters drawn, even the dogs whimpered in their sleep. Pause, twitching at something they could not see. An old man hung a mirror outside his home face, to the street to catch what passed by. He shattered it 3 days later, and dug into his own eyes with his fingernails. In the distance, someone played a bone flute. The tune was not known. The tune was not kind. The children no longer played. They sat in circles, tracing runes into the mud with sticks no one had taught them. By the 6th day, the fog had not lifted. It had settled into the lungs of the village. Breathing felt like swallowing cloth. The black veil hung over the well, tied with red twine. Fluttering like a tattered wing, no one touched it, no one dared. The midwife, old and sharp as a sewing needle, cut her own tongue out after delivering twins with no eyes. She left it in the offering bowl. No one emptied it. At the edge of the woods, a figure stood still for 3 nights, and movenly. The hunters saw it. They never returned. And yet, life went on. Bread still rose in cold ovens. Wives still whispered to husbands, who no longer spoke. Children still clutched wooden dolls soaked in rosemary, but it was not life. It was waiting. The kind of waiting done in the breath between a scream and the sound that follows. The kind done in graveyards, before names are carved. This was not survival. It was endurance. A question drawn out over days, not if they would die, but how, and whether they would still be themselves when the time came. So they waited under the veil with their prayers, their herbs, their silence, and the fog, always the fog, which never lifted, only thickened, until even the birds forgot how to fly. And beneath it all, something was listening, listening for the name that would call it forward, Soft pause, and that name. Was already for Mingan someone's tongue? It begins with a bowl. Stone. Cracked. Rim-stained rust dark with old prayers. They call it the bloodletting floor. Not in mockery, in reverence, in fear. Beneath. The apothecary's chamber, where the beams. Sweat, and the air stinks of salt and thyme. A boy is held down with ropes of twisted flax. He thrashes. But not like a child, like something caged, something borrowed, something returned. The leech crouches beside him, Udlow eyes glinting with oil and calculation. He draws the blade from its goatskin sheath. It does not gleam. It absorbs the torchlight, like it remembers where it's been. The cut is swift. A thin red arc across the boy's forearm. Like a string drawn from muscle, the blood pours out slow at first, then faster. As if eager, they say, demons live in the blood, not the soul, not the breath. But in the thick river beneath the skin, the leech murmurs, too dark. Too fast? It's nested in the liver. He ties red thread around the boy's ankles, a charm older than the church's mercy. Outside. A storm gathers with no wind, only pressure, heavy, listening. The floor beneath them groans, not from rot, but memory. It has known hundreds like this. The weeping, the retching, the things that speak in Tungasand, laugh when their eyes roll back. The walls are covered in parchment, drawings of bodies torn open. Organs labeled in Latin, and in something older, scratchings that hum when the candle flickers in the corner. A brass basin simmers with vinegar. Copper coins dropped in like offerings. The smell burns the eyes. A ward, they say. But against what? No one says. The boy's mother waits beyond the curtain, kneeling on bare stone, cheek pressed against the cold earth as if it might answer. She does not cry. She hums a lullaby, but it is off dashki. And far too slow, the boy's screams fade. Not because the pain is gone, but because something else has taken over. His body tenses, then stills. Only his fingers twitched, like remembering how to pray. The leech closes the wound with resin and ash, his hands trembling. Not from guilt, but reverence. He has seen this before. The quiet that comes before the demon chooses a new throat. They leave the boy on the floor overnight, to see if he wakes, to see who wakes at midnight. The rats flee the room. At 1, the blood in the basin turns black. At 2, boy begins to whisper to someone no one can see. They do not ask him what he sees. They know better. Knowing is how it gets in. At dawn, he is silent. Eyes open, no fever, no cough. He smiles. The leech smiles back, but his hands shake so hard, he drops the bowl. They carry him to the tower, chained gently, like one might tether a flame. From the bell window, he watches the village. He hums now, not the lullaby, something else, something with rhythm. The birds fall quiet when he sings. Below, the leech writes his notes in a book bound in lambs. He sketches the boy's face, but the ink runs before he can finish the eyes. He writes one word beneath the sketch. Not a diagnosis, not a cure, just asterisk dwelling. Asterisk, the villagers bring their sick more quickly now. The rumor spreads. The boy survived, but some notice he doesn't blink, or that his shadow stretches toward candlelight instead of away from it. Still they come. A girl with lips blue as bruises. A man who speaks only in numbers. A child who won't eat but keeps. Growing, each is bled. Each leaves part of themselves on the floor. Not all return the same. Not all return. Outside, a cat cries at a door that never opens. It stares at the tower window for hours. Its fur falls out in clumps. Inside, the boy watches and waits. He does not sleep. The bloodletting floor is washed each morning with vinegar and lye. But the stains never truly leave. They rise again by dusk. Like secrets returning for breath, the priest still keeps the chapel closed. But now he listens at the tower's base. Rosary in one hand, a dagger in the other. He hears no words, only humming, and footsteps that never match the boy's. There is talk of burning it, the tower, the leech, the boy, but no one moves, because to destroy it means naming it, and names have power. For now, they bleed the sickness out. One bowl at a time, they call it medicine, they call it mercy, but in the cold between breaths, they wonder if the blood is what it wanted, what happened. It's had enough. And from the tower, the boy smiles again. He is waiting, so is whatever watches through. They brought her down from the shelf in silence, wrapped in fraying linen. Bound with rusted brass, the skull of St. Eadburga was heavier than they remembered, as if memory itself had grown bones. 6 men walked barefoot through the mire, carrying her like a lantern into fog that refused to break, each step a prayer, each prayer a question, each question left unanswered. No one spoke her miracles aloud anymore, not since the miller's son went mad after, touching her jaw. But now, the village needed a sign, not hope, just proof they were still seen. They passed beneath soot-stained eaves, through a street where no doors opened. Even the dying didn't wave. Old women knelt in mud as the relic passed, pressing their foreheads to the earth. A child reached out and was pulled back. Sharply, her cry echoed like prophecy. By the time they reached the chapel steps, the fog had soaked through every robe, and the brass teeth of the reliquary box had begun to sing, sound like wind caught in a throat. Not music, not mourning, just the hush of something waking. They placed the skull beneath the baker's wife. Her eyes had not closed in 8 days. She'd stopped weeping, stopped blinking. She stared only at the ceiling beams, as if counting the hours before something arrived. They tucked St. Eadburga beneath the straw pallet, her hollow eyes pressed against the woman's spine, and waited. Priest fasted beside her. The priest fasted beside her. He whispered psalms through cracked lips, drank nothing but rainwater collected in a jawbone by morning. The wife awoke. She sat up slowly, spoke not a word, and smiled, but she would not touch bread, not a crust nor crumb. She tore pages from the misland, chewed them slowly, as if tasting truth. The villagers rejoiced. They said the relic had healed her. They said the saint still walked among them. But the cat would no longer enter her house, and the hearth refused to catch flame at night. She would hum, soft, low, tuneless, and on the 3rd night, her husband found her digging beneath the floorboards with her fingernails. She turned to him and whispered, "It's under us, always has been." The priest begged the council to remove the relic. He claimed it had been emptied, a husk, not a vessel. He dreamt of Eadburga nightly now, her mouth sewn shut, her fingers made of ash. But the people refused. They kissed the box. Each morning, left coins and teeth and braided hair. They said the miracles were real. They needed to believe it, even if it watched them back. One girl left a sparrow, its feather on the altar the next day. Her fever broke, but her shadow began arriving in rooms before she did. Soon, others asked for the saint. They brought her to a farmer's. Sanwo spoke with the voice of a grown man, to a midwife, whose womb filled with salt instead of blood, to a shepherd whose flock would not follow him each time. The skull grew heavier each time. Eyes seemed deeper. A carpenter swore he saw it breathing. A monk fainted at the sound of its sigh. Still, they carried her, and still the fog did not lift. One morning, the baker's wife walked into the chapel alone, naked eyes full of rain. She placed the skull back on the altar without rope, or box, or brass. She turned to the pews and said, "It's finished. It's finished now. It's ours again." And then she bit off the tip of her own finger and used the blood toe write something across the floorboards. They tried to scrub it. The letters would not fade. Even fire left the message untouched. No one speaks the word aloud, but every child knows how to draw it. That night, the priest dreamed of the saint one final time. She stood in a field of gallows, each one swaying without wind. Her jaw hung open, not screaming, only breathing. And in that breath were all the names of the forgotten. chanted like a dirge. He awoke with ash in his mouth. Now the relic lies untouched, wrapped again, sealed in wax and pine. But no one steps near it. The chapel smells of iron and violets, scent that does not come from this world, and the baker's wife. She sings to walls that bleed sap. She eats only lavender, and her shadow has stopped moving when she does. So they speak of Eid Bergenot as saint, but as mirror, not healer. But vessel, she did not banish the sickness. She revealed its face, and it was not new, only patient, only waiting. And now, something else waits in her. Place something without bone, something without name, but not without hunger. Behind the leper's ward, where even the rats walked lightly, stood a wall that no hand dared bless. It leaned slightly eastward, as if listening, as if it knew what the earth beneath it had swallowed. No one built it. It had simply appeared stone over stone, as old as the path to the gallows, etched with prayers that bled. No mortar, just memory, and something older than time. They called it the Screaming Wall, not for what came from it, but for what it absorbed. On its surface were claw marks, like those left by animals, or men who had forgotten they were men. Pinned flowers turned black within hours. Charcoal prayers vanished overnight, and the moss there grew red, like something feeding beneath. At dusk, a woman in blue stood before it, her belly swollen with child. Her hair knotted with straw and salt. She did not blink. She placed her palm flat against the stone and whispered names. Not her own, not the child's, but names that hadn't been spoken in 100 winters. Names. The wind shivered to hear. In the abbey, Brother Elric lit black candles against the teachings of Rome. He poured wax over pages torn from holy books, muttering, corners. It lives in corners. He drew circles inside circles, each tighter than the last, till even light bent strangely around them. He refused to sleep in beds. He kept salt in his mouth. He cut his fingernails with iron. Outside, the coughing reached. The choir boys. One vomited feathers, another bled from the eyes after singing the Maffify. By dawn, none would enter the chapel. They said. A second voice echoed now, one no throat belonged to. Still, the woman came, each dusk to the wall. Sometimes she knelt, other times she danced, barefoot, bleeding. To music no one else could hear. She spoke. In twos, child and shadow, cradle and chain, milk and salt. On the 7th day, she brought her unborn child to the wall, pressed her stomach to the stone end, screamed. Not in pain, not in labor, in recognition. The wind stopped, the birds fled, and the wall answered. A low, rattling moan, like breath dragged across broken flutes, stone shifting, language trying to be born. The villagers heard it from the fields. Even the deaf could feel it in their teeth. Some fell to their knees, others ran to bury mirrors. The priest wept openly and tore off his collar, claiming, "We were warned. It wrote it all. We saw. We didn't listen." The woman vanished before morning. Some say she walked into the woods. Some say she climbed inside the wall. But when the masons came to inspect it, they found something new. A small indentation shaped like a hand, still warm, still pulsing. They tried to seal it with stone, with lead, with prayer, each night. It reopened. A boy dared press his ear to it once. He did not speak again. He paints now in circles. Always in black. No one teaches him but his fingers now. They say the wall is growing, that it stretches an inch each solstice, that it dreams. Inside the leper's ward, those two far gone for reason scream, only when it's silent, as if silence is what hurts them most. Brother Elric has gone blind, but he smiles now. He says he sees more than ever. He touches the wall at night. With fingers bandaged and burned, he whispers back to it, not in Latin, not in English, in something else. He keeps a ledger. Of the names it says, every entry begins with the phrase, "It remembers." Then, In trembling ink, so must we. No one lives in the homes closest to it anymore. Doors sealed with wax dot windows, painted black. One woman birthed a child with a stone in its mouth. She placed it at the wall. Without ceremony, it was gone by morning. The bishop came once. With incense and armor, he left screaming naked. He bit off his own finger so he'd never write again now. They build fences around it, not to keep it in, but to remind themselves where not to go. But fences rot, and eyes wander. And when the wind changes, it carries whispers down the road, low Selene, and telling truths no one wants to know. The wall still stands, wider, darker, hungrier, and if you listen, truly listen, you will hear it speak the names of things you haven't lost yet. But will tomorrow someone will try to pray in front of it? Again, someone always does, and the wall always. Its answer is not with mercy, but with memory. The bell tower had long fallen silent. Where once its iron tongue rang through frostbitten dawns, now only the wind moaned through its broken ribs. Moss crept like infection down its stones. Below, in the nave of St. Ethelred's, the wooden pews sat crooked. Like teeth loosened in the jaw of God, the tapestries had mildewed. The saints in stained glass bled sunlight across dust and rot, and yet they gathered. Not all, no, but the desperate. The bent and breathless. The mothers with hollow eyes, the men who spoke to no one, and the priest whose voice trembled. Now, not with faith, but fatigue. He read the same verses again and again. From pages that had blurred with sweat and candle wax, the psalter was worn soft at the edges, like cloth. He no longer preached of heaven, only of deliverance, of purification, of fire. No one asked why the church had stopped burying its dead. They knew. The ground was too full. Children no longer played among the gravestones. Even the crows had gone. In their place came silence, thick and watchful, a silence that stared. The choir loft above had become a refuge for those who had nowhere else. A woman whose husband died coughing blood, a boy whose tongue was cut in penance, a midwife with no infants left to swaddle. They slept between broken benches, heads bowed, as if still praying. But at night, that was when it changed. It began, not with a voice, but with a breath. A long-drawn hush, like air escaping a sealed tomb. Then a humming, low and off-key, like a lullaby remembered. Wrong. And then the singing. It came from nowhere, from the beams, from beneath the altar, from the stones. High voices, young voices, clear and cold as melted snow. A hymn no one had taught them. Some fled, others stayed, frozen in awe. The priest knelt. In the aisle, tears on his face, mouthing words he no longer understood. A miracle, he whispered, or a warning. One night a woman followed the song. She stepped barefoot down into the crypt, holding a candle that sputtered against the breath of the earth, and there, among the bones of abbots and knights, she saw them figures, not children, not yet corpses. Draped in funeral linen, eyes closed, mouths open in song, their chests did not rise, but they sang. When she returned to the nave, her hair had turned white. They called it the hallowed choir after that. Some believed it was a punishment for unconfessed sins. Others said it was protection, a sign that angels had descended to guard the last. Faithful. But the village changed after that. Doors were marked with ash in the shape of tongues. Mothers stuffed wool in their infants' ears. It's the church now. Longer opened its doors at dusk, and still the singing continued. One morning, the priest was found face down on the altar, hands outstretched as if in embrace. A smile carved into his cheeks with a blade. In his blood, a message, "We have been heard." And that night no song came, only silence. And the weeping of those who had believed the singing had kept the darkness at bay, now it returned, in the absence of that haunting choir. Shadows crept deeper. Windows cracked without wind. Fires refused to catch. And when the new priest arrived, he refused to enter the crypt. He preached outside, rain or snow, under a sky thick with watching crows. What lived beneath St. Ethelred's was no longer a secret. The villagers no longer spoke of salvation, only survival. They avoided the graveyard, walked backwards past the church, never whistled, never sang. Music belonged to them now, and as winter neared, the days shrank. The silence deepened, and in the cracks of that silence, something else stirred, something ancient, something patient. A child, once mute, began to hum as he played with stones. A melody none had taught him, a tune heard once, long ago, in a church that no longer slept, far beyond the village. In a monastery untouched by plague, a scribe copied a strange passage from an older text. When the dead do not rest, it read, the living must hold their breath. He paused, ink pooling on the parchment. The wind outside carried something distant. A tone. A hint of voices long buried, rising like smoke from a broken altar. And he knew this was not the end. It was the echo of a deeper story. One carved not into scripture, but into the bones of the earth. The hollowed choir had gone quiet, but silence, after all, is only the breath before the next note. Narrator VO. The first snowfall came early that year, not gentle, not soft. It fell like ash, heavy, unrelenting, and wrong. Villagers stood in their doorways, staring at the sky as if it had betrayed them, because the snow was black, not soot black, but deeper, oily, refusing to melt. Children reached out with curious hands, their fingers blistered where the flakes touched skin. That night, the village doctor packed what supplies he had and left without a word. He never made it past the ridge. They found his boots half buried in black snow, still warm inside the church. The new priest refused to ring the bells. He claimed the sound echoed too long, that something was ringing back. The choir loft had been boarded up, but on the seventh night, boards splintered from the inside. Song returned. This time, it was no hymn. It was a dirge, slow, cracked, crawling like fingers along wet stone, and something in it was calling names. A woman swore she heard her dead sister's voice. A man screamed when he recognized the lullaby he sang to his drowned daughter. The villagers held their breath again, but it was too late. The snow had crept in. Under doors, through keyholes, into lungs. By morning, 3 houses stood empty. No struggle, just silence. And in each doorway, footprints. Bare small, the priests gathered those who remained in the square. They circled the old fire pit, eyes wide, shoulders touching, waiting for answers. He did not give them hope. Only a story. A tale of a forgotten winter, of a monastery built atop a burial ground older than maps, of monks who sang to keep the sleepers asleep. He looked at the church, at the boarded choir loft, at the snow still falling black. They've been listening, he whispered, and now they want to be heard. Behind him, the church doors creaked open, but no wind blew, no footsteps, only a voice, soft, childlike, humming a lullaby lost to time. The villagers did not move even. As one by one, their names were spoken, and the snow kept falling. Narrator VO. By the 7th night, the fog no longer lifted. It clung to the thatched eaves and wool cloaks, curled around chimney smoke, and swallowed lantern light whole. Time no longer moved. Forward only in circles. The rooster crowed at midnight. The sun refused to rise. Bread never rose in the hearth, Elder Marta claimed. The stars had vanished from her water bowl. She used to read fortunes in the ripples now. Only stillness stared back. The graveyard gates groaned open without hands. Graves sat undisturbed. But the soil above them had changed, soft, uplifted, breathing. Inside the long house, fevered boy repeated the same phrase, "They are not in the ground." He would not say who they were, only that their voices were cold, wet, and laughing. The village blacksmith, strong and skeptical, broke the altar cross in a fit of rage. He swore no god would stay silent through this. His hands blistered in the shape of rope, though none touched him by morning. Forge was cold, and the blacksmith's tongue had turned to stone in his mouth. He could not cry out, only grunt like the ox he once slaughtered by moonlight. They dragged him to the chapel, wrapped him in wool, and whispered prayers like ancient spells. But he just stared, and pointed to the sky, not upward, but north, toward the edge of the forest, where a light had begun to burn, not firelight, not torchlight, but a pale, steady glow, pulsing like breath through the trees. The priest would not go. The healer begged them to wait, but a child followed it, silent, barefoot, drawn like thread through a needle. By the time they noticed her absence, the light had vanished, and all that remained beneath the forest archway was a single braid of golden hair tied with black wool. No birds sang that day, and in the village square, the church bell began to ring on its own, 12 times, once for every soul now. Missing narrator VO, the bell's final toll lingered like a bruise in the air. Not even the wind dared speak. Ash settled on rooftops that had not seen fire in days. Milk soured in sealed clay jugs. Bread rose with black veins. Even the dogs stopped barking. Their eyes turned to corners no one dared to look. In the chapel, from the altar candles had begun to drip upward. The healer, once so firm in her herbs and rituals, knelt barefoot on the cold stone floor, drawing circles in chalk that would not hold their shape. "The veil is thin now," she whispered, "as thin as lambskin stretched over bone." Men spoke in mutters of the mire light, a glow they had glimpsed beyond the forest, where no light should live. One child returned that evening, shoeless, bloodless, smiling, but it was not her eyes that met her mother's. It was something behind them. Watching that night, the stars returned, but not in the sky. They blinked in puddles, in wells, in shattered glass. Looking back, the blacksmith clawed symbols into his walls, until his fingers bled. Spirals, horns, a woman with no face. He laughed without breath until his chest caved like an emptied barrel. When dawn came, villagers found his house burned to the ground, the forge still untouched, and in the ash an iron nail, curved like a question mark, still warm. They buried it at the foot of the chapel, and above it carved a single word in stone: forgive. But no moss would grow on that grave, and the earth refused to harden. Narrator VO. The frost came early, not with snow, but with silence. Wells froze from the inside out, not with ice, but with something darker, something that shimmered like oil when the sun dared to touch it. Crows gathered in rows along the roof lines, watching. Not one of them called. In the north field, the scarecrow had fallen, not from wind. There had been no wind for 3 days. It was found face down, arms buried, as if it had tried to crawl back. Into the earth, the priest declared it an omen. He stood atop the chapel steps, screamed psalms until his voice gave out. Then he wept. Then he vanished. His robes were found days later. They folded neatly on the chapel altar inside them. A single tooth, human, cracked down the center. The elders spoke of the old oath, the promise made long ago. When the stones were first laden, the blood of the willing soaked the roots of the chapel oak. They said it expired. They said no one remembered the words in the village square. An old woman knelt beside the empty well, her hands cupped as if holding invisible water. They never wanted worship, she said softly. They only wanted silence. And we broke it. A storm rolled in, not from the sky, but from beneath the hills. It rumbled like a beast learning its name, and with each tremor, the soil shifted, bones rising like frost-heaved roots. Children began to hum a song that no one had taught them. A tune with no words, but every ear knew its grief. That night, when the moon rose, it rose from the west, and every door in the village opened at once, but no one stepped through. Only the light did, cold, pale, uninvited narrator. The monastery bells did not ring that morning. Instead, the wind carried a sound like teeth chattering inside a locked chest, metal, brittle, rhythmic. The villagers called it the clicking. No one knew where it came from, but it grew louder as dawn bled across the sky. Inside the scriptorium, Brother Malric dipped his quill in soot instead of ink. The letters he wrote moved when no one looked, curling like worms in old soil. He burned the parchment. But the symbols, returned the next day, carved into his door. A newborn was found at the church threshold, swaddled in robes not worn for 2 centuries. No one claimed her. No. One heard her cry. She just watched eyes already glassy. Already old, the apothecary locked herself inside her root cellar. She whispered 2 jars and bled into cups, measuring pain in droplets. On the 7th day, the herbs shriveled without touch. The air inside turned copper. They found her journal bound. In lambskin, on the final page, a prayer with no God, no subject, no mercy. Outside, the sheep turned in circles until they collapsed, their eyes milk-white. But their bodies warm for days after death. The butcher wouldn't touch them. Said their flesh hummed. The bishop arrived by horseback, his cloak lined with relics. He did not dismount. He tossed salt into the well, whispered Latin backwards, and declared the village excommunicated from itself. Then he rode on. That night, the stars turned. North became east, and the constellations spelled. No names ever written in the book of ours, one child swore. She saw angels in the barn rafters, but they had no wings, only mouths, and they wept not tears. But ink, the villagers did not sleep. That night, they only listened to the clicking, to the mouths above, to the silence that now grew teeth. By winter's end, nothing burned any more. The firewood hissed, but did not catch. Candles collapsed into wax without ever lighting. The sky above the village turned a pale, colorless bronze, like breath trapped beneath old glass. And when snow fell, it whispered, not wind, not storm. Whispers soft, ancient knowing, brother. Malric wandered the forest barefoot, his hands blackened from ink and frostbite. He spoke only to the trees now, called them keepers of the bones. When he vanished, the birds returned, but they no longer sang. They watched. Still, unblinking, the girl left at the church steps, never aged. Not a day. She sat on the chapel floor, surrounded by moths that never touched her skin. She spoke once. It was never the demons. Then silence swallowed her again. The well ran dry, then overflowed. With nothing, just the idea of water. The echo of what once quenched. The bishop was found face down in the chapel of a far-off city, his back carved with letters from no known tongue, each mark weeping slow rivulets of wine-red blood. They say he died smiling. The apothecary's journal was discovered again. Miles from the village, pages fused shut like scabbed wounds. Only one remained legible. It read, "We did not cure the sickness. We invited it in and gave it names we could blame." No one remembers the village's name now. Only the veil that covered its sky. Only the silence that fed its fields. And somewhere, beyond time and tale, the clicking begins again, as if it never stopped, as if the story was always listening.